Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We need to move on.
The Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, promised that his speech last night addressing Britain's place in the EU would be a bit of a yawner. Well, it can't have been that boring, as it's managed to make the front pages of several of this morning's papers. Mr Carney said the evidence suggested Britain's economy had prospered because of UK's membership of the EU. Let's have a look.
In some respects, the UK is the leading beneficiary of the famous four freedoms set out in the 1957 Treaty of Rome. These, of course, are free movement of goods, services, labour and capital. So although the UK's dynamism is the product of many factors, including deep human capital, well-developed physical infrastructure, a competitive fiscal regime, and the integrity of the rule of law, the EU has arguably bolstered it by establishing the world's largest single market.
But Mr Carney went on to say that there needed to be reforms in our relationship with the EU to protect the UK from financial shocks. Earlier today, George Osborne, the Chancellor, appeared before the Treasury Select Committee, where he welcomed Mr Carney's remarks.
I agree with the speech the Governor made, the analysis he presents, which is that European Union membership has helped create a more open and dynamic UK economy, but, and there's a crucial but, developments in the Eurozone mean that we do need safeguards for the United Kingdom.
George Osborne there. Nigel Farage, he's clearly pleased with Mark Carney's intervention. Are you?
What Mark Carney meant was that the common market had been a good thing, that opening up, getting rid of tariffs, which had plagued the Western world post-World War II, getting rid of those tariffs had made our economy more open, of course. But that's not the same thing as a political union with a flag and an anthem that wants an army and everything else. But he also did say there are potential threats coming down the line to this country. And do you know what? Actually, I take the view that was a very balanced speech.
You do?
Yeah, I think people from both sides take from it what they want, and in a week's time, we will have forgotten about it.
Right, oh, right, OK. You say it was balanced. You don't think he overreached himself then in this? I mean, it is a political debate, after all. Yeah,
it's a political debate, but no, he made it clear that there are threats coming down the line, and that just, that can mean legislation.
Well,
it can mean the Eurozone integrating more deeply and us effectively being dragged in its wake. So, no, I think he said something that, all sides can take something from that.
Right, OK. I mean, he did say the EU membership, so this is EU membership, not just common market, reinforces the dynamism of the UK economy. A more dynamic economy is more resilient to shocks, can grow more rapidly without generating inflationary pressure or creating risks to financial stability, and can also be associated with more effective competition. Well, I can see why George Osborne was pleased, because in a nutshell, he is saying our membership of the EU, in his mind and within his mandate, has been a good thing.
Well, there are some people that deliberately conflate the ability to trade with each other free of tariff and to move capital around with membership of the European Union.
And is he one of those?
Well, that's what he appeared to say last night. Actually, they're two very different things.
Well, I mean, I would suggest to you Mark Carney knows what he's doing and what he's talking about. He's not a stupid man. And taking from that, it seems to me that everything that he mentioned in that speech really was done on the premise of the UK staying within the EU. Well, he did make those concerns clear, but they were, again, sort of a negotiating
stance. He's an establishment figure. You would expect a figure like that to say things that were broadly in support of the status quo, but warning there are risks coming down the track. I genuinely don't take great significance from it.
Right. I mean, well, you say you don't take take it as significant. But, I mean, he is the Governor of the Bank of England.
Yes.
I mean, one might say you don't get a much more important and greater...
And who appointed him? Who gave him the job?
Yes, but he could have given a speech, or actually not given a speech at all. I mean, is it his duty, as he said, to give his assessment of the overall impact of EU membership on the UK economy?
Mercifully, the government's attempt to throw out of the window all the purdah rules that we think are sound and sensible during election periods. Mercifully, he won't be able, a week before the referendum when it comes, to make some outrageous statement. And if this is all we get from the Governor of the Bank of England during this debate, I'll be very happy.
Right, OK, so if it's limited. What about if he comes back again later on, or do you think he shouldn't? Would you be warning Mark Carney to stay away from this debate now he's made this speech?
Well, it's supposed to be an independent central bank, and if there was something that he genuinely thought was shocking, he should say so. But I think the way this debate is developing, the way this referendum is developing, all the things I expected the Remain side to say, they're now having great difficulty in saying, namely that if we weren't part of the European Union, we wouldn't go on buying, selling goods from each other, Nissan wouldn't manufacture their cars in Britain. That stuff is beginning to disappear, and I wouldn't expect him to speak on this again.
Oh, you wouldn't expect him to speak
No.
on this again? I mean, there was nothing in that speech, was there, where he indicated leaving would be better for the UK?
No, nothing. And again, I wouldn't expect that from an establishment figure. That case, that argument, is the one that some of us in politics and many in business are going to make and have started to make very effectively.
All right. Thank you.
Now, as we've said before, you could be forgiven for thinking that the SNP had won last year's referendum on Scottish independence. As it was, the defeat acted as a springboard for the party to make sweeping gains at the general election. So as UKIP, led by our guest of the day, Nigel Farage, prepares for the referendum on Britain's membership of the EU, are there any lessons his party could learn from the Scottish experience? Here's Ellie with more.
It was probably the most successful political defeat in modern history.
The movement is abroad in Scotland that will take this nation forward, and we shall go forward as one nation. Thank you very much.
During the campaign, Alex Salmond said the Scottish referendum was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. 8 months later, the SNP wiped the floor with pretty much everyone in May's general election, and there was talk of doing it all over again. But before that happens, there's another referendum to concentrate on, and another party for whom independence, albeit from a different union, is literally the name of their game.
One clear, crucial difference between the European Union referendum and the Scottish independence referendum is at the end of the day in the Scottish independence referendum, the SNP owned the Yes campaign, and the vision of independence that was put forward in the independence referendum was essentially the SNP's vision. In this referendum, in contrast, this is not simply going to be, the Leave campaign is not simply going to be UKIP's campaign, or if it is, it's not going to go very far. If that campaign is going to go very far, it's also going to have to get a substantial section of the Conservative Party backing it, as well as those Labour MPs it can pick up.
At UKIP's conference, Nigel Farage told his supporters to put country above party to secure victory in the referendum. But he also insists that doesn't mean the party is out if Britain decides to stay in.
If it's a full, free and fair referendum, I will accept the result. Would it make UKIP redundant? No, because just look at what's happened in Scotland. The Scots rejected their independence referendum, and yet the SNP have gone to remarkable heights.
That could involve UKIP rebranding itself as a party focusing on immigration, says one expert. But either way, its future will rely on the outcome of the referendum.
The real dilemma for UKIP comes if they win the referendum. Then essentially they've removed the founding cause that underpins the entire organisation. Some in the party would like to believe in a future for UKIP beyond a victory in the referendum. It's actually very difficult then to foresee where a openly Eurosceptic party fits into mainstream British politics.
The polls in the EU referendum are already closer than they almost ever were in the Scottish referendum. And UKIP will have the battle of its life ahead.
Thank you.
I'm joined now by the SNP MP Stephen Gethens. He's the party spokesman on Europe at Westminster. Nigel Farage, of course, is still with us as our guest of the day. Stephen Gethens, the polls at the moment for in-out, they're closer than the polls were for in-out in the Scottish referendum.
Yes, yeah.
Does that put Mr Farage, UKIP, in a stronger position for this referendum?
The first thing, I mean, they're closer south of the border, north of the border. Obviously, there's quite a significant majority in favour of remaining in the European Union. Yeah, I mean, one thing that happened that was quite interesting in the independence referendum, many interesting things happened, but one of them was the way that the gap between yes and no closed over the final 6 months of the campaign.
Because it had been much wider in favour of the Union.
It had.
In the spring of last year.
And what was interesting was as we got closer and closer, some people might argue that just after George Osborne's intervention, they started to get a lot closer, but that's one I'll leave to the pundits. But the polls did get a lot closer. I think as people focused on the arguments and really interrogated the arguments as well.
Did you ever dream there'd be this incredible bounce having lost the referendum?
Did I think I'd be here today, Andrew? Is that what you're asking?
Well, I suppose that's a personal way of asking.
A personal way of asking it. No, I mean, if anybody had said we're going to have 56 MPs out of 59, no, I mean, no. And I don't think, if there's anybody out there who did think we're getting 56 out of 59, they're not here anymore because they would have won a great deal of money at the bookies.
Indeed, that's right, they'd be in the Caribbean.
We didn't see it.
You didn't see it. No. If you lose the referendum...
Yeah, we're not going to lose the referendum.
No, but if it's conditional. If you do... Is there any chance of a UKIP bounce similar to the SNP bounce?
Anything on quite the same scale would be virtually impossible. And John Curtis made the point that, you know, the SNP led and dominated and were alone in that Scottish campaign for their side of the argument. UKIP's position is perfectly clear, but there will be Conservative and Labour and other figures advocating we leave the EU. So, of course, it won't happen in the same way. However...
there was a broader campaign for independence in Scotland. I mean, the SNP were core.
But politically...
But it was Party, Labour for Independence. You know, there were some very significant voices outside the SNP.
Yeah, but politically, it was dominated by the SNP, very, very clearly.
And is it a weakness that you won't have, that your campaign won't be dominated by one major force?
Well, let's see what happens between now and the referendum. You know, there are going to be all sorts of voices advocating leaving the EU, probably more right now than anybody can even imagine. Who knows, maybe even some in the cabinet, you know. Let's see. But I think this, don't underestimate the ability of a referendum to potentially realign and change British politics, not Scottish politics, but the rest of the UK. You know, that 75 referendum, the Labour Party were never reconciled after it. The SDP breakaway in 1981, which led to a completely different kind of Labour Party, ultimately under Tony Blair, really was those who had won the referendum but couldn't accept the fact their own party hadn't changed. And I think there may well be, after this referendum, a lot of traditional Conservative and Labour voters who feel that the inside won, but did it so dishonestly.
Have you got any tips for him?
No, I mean, there was a thing that was very important.
He's fought the referendum.
During the independence referendum, and actually this is where it was much broader than the SNP. And who knows what will happen? We're at the very start of this referendum campaign. But there were trade unionists coming out, academics coming out, the civic groups. It was a very organic campaign. And I think that was positive. People who argued for yes and people who argued for no. I think the politicians had a role, but actually the referendum debate went much further than that. And that's what contributed, after all, to having such a big turnout, which...
If England was to vote to leave, and Scotland, when you add up the purely Scottish votes, it had voted to stay in, but overall would have to vote to leave under the UK referendum, is it without doubt that you would want a second referendum on independence?
Well, let's see what happens. I mean, it's something that the First Minister's talked
but I'm
about.
giving you a possible scenario.
Let's see what happens. I mean, look, we
tried... the polls were still against you?
Andrew, we tried to prevent this situation from happening by building in a double majority, but that was rejected by the House of Commons.
I understand.
But shouldn't we rephrase the question? Because the British referendum...
Don't go there again.
Now, well, hang on a second. The referendum is on Britain becoming an independent country from the European Union. So your referendum would be against independence, wouldn't it?
Well, not really.
No, I'd enjoy seeing that.
I'll give you the
I'm looking forward to that.
20 seconds for the final word.
The referendum was about being a full member state of the European Union. There was a lot of support for that.
Under which you cannot be independent.
Let's not go
there.
Under
which...
Well, let's
We've only got 5 seconds now. We'll leave this for another.
Not 5 hours.
Come back and we'll talk about that next time. Thank you.
Now, on that basis, you might think that Andrew and I ask our guests some fairly direct questions. You might think we don't always get the most direct of answers, hardly ever. So here at the Daily Politics, we'd like to take our hats off and then doff them to the New Zealand Prime Minister John Key and the presenters on radio, is it Hauraki, for this, probably one of the most honest political interviews of all time.
Are you ready to play Thank You for Your Honesty?
Well, do I get a choice?
No. Okay,
You're right.
fine.
Deep breaths in. You'll be fine.
Okay.
Power through it.
Far away.
Prime Minister John Key, have you been drunk, tipsy or twanged in the past month?
No.
Have you ever killed an animal bigger than an insect?
Yes.
Have you pashed a man?
No.
Was the Virgin Mary really a virgin?
No.
Have you ever done wheeze in the shower?
Yes.
Have you ever stolen anything?
Yes.
Prime Minister John Key, thank you for your honesty.
Thank you very much.
I like that. Yes. That was the New Zealand Prime Minister John Key appearing on the rock music station Radio Huraki in their quiz. Thank you for your honesty. And they say the age of deference is dead. Well, of course, our guest of the day, Nigel Farage, appears regularly on a radio phone-in show in this country. And he's used to some tricky questions, but we've got some here for him that are so fiendish. We may even give him a mug if he answers them all truthfully. Remember, Nigel, is yes or no.
I could be Stonewall.
And you have to answer. I'm going to start. Have you been drunk in the last month?
I can't remember.
That's not a yes. That's
a very
not a
good
yes or
answer.
no.
That's a
It's not
yes.
yes or no.
If you can't remember, it's a yes.
It's a good answer.
Have you ever killed an animal bigger than an insect?
I would think I have, yes.
Yeah,
What?
good.
No, but you see, I'm not going into all this.
Have you
because
ever
I'll be-
stolen anything?
I've borrowed things.
The Prime Minister was better. Have you ever
Oh, he
changed?
was.
Have you ever changed a nappy?
Yes, in extremis.
Have you ever kissed a man?
Not in that way, no.
And carrying on from that, is
I think
Douglas
we've gone far enough, actually.
is Douglas Carswell cleverer than you?
I mean, in some ways, yes.
Have you ever punched someone?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Have you ever parked in a disabled parking space?
No. No, I don't think I have.
Have you ever lied in an interview?
Like this one.
Oh, yeah. Only on this programme.
Only on the programme. And have you ever flirted with a member of the European Parliament?
Well, I like to think that I'm doing my bit
It's yes or no.
in Europe
It's yes or
to
no.
promote good relations between all different countries.
So that's another
in
yes.
the
That's
European States.
clearly
Let's
a no.
move on to another quiz.
Did that go well?
It went terribly.
I've been getting away with it all my